as I mentioned earlier, I'm a former surface warfare officer. So for you non-Navy types, that means I'm a ship driver. And anybody who knows surface warfare knows one thing. As a group, we are the most sleep-deprived people since the Air Force invented sleep, right? I mean, I have personally spent several years at sea, and shockingly less than some on this call, I understand. But I can't recall a single 24-hour period at sea where I got more than 5 or 6 hours of sleep, and rarely more than 3 or 4 without interruption. So I left active duty 20 years ago. I'm still catching up. Now, this week's speaker is John Cordle. He's also a surface warfare officer, and on top of that, he's a nuclear SWO with a couple of at-sea command tours under his belt. Now, that's a combination that drives your sleep budget down into negative numbers. Years ago, John made an observation that everybody already kind of knew. Sleep deprivation has an effect on judgment and reaction time that is similar to intoxication. But then John took it a step further, and he asked a few questions that apparently nobody in a position of leadership had bothered to ask. Why have we created a system that has us driving around billion-dollar warships while we are effectively 3 sheets to the wind? Good question, right? What does that cost us in terms of lives and material? Another good question. And finally, what the hell can we do about it? So it turns out all of those questions have answers, and I'm going to let John pick up the story from here. So John, welcome to Ringknocker. Welcome back into the speaker's chair, sir. Very happy to have you, and we're all very, very interested in what you have to say, and we all promise to stay awake. Floor is yours, sir.
All right, I'll try. Okay, well, hey, thanks, Jason. Thanks very much. I guess my first question is, what is that thing behind you? I've been wondering that for like 3 sessions.
That's a giant piece of teak root. Like they dug the root of a teak tree out of the ground, hosed it off, kind of polished it up, and there it is. It's one of those things that the Balinese excel at. But it weighs about 400 pounds.
Okay, yeah, that's been keeping me awake for the last 3 weeks. So now all right, well, right. So thanks for the intro. I guess if I had to sum it up, 30-year nuke, SWO, and pretty much always tired. And so that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. What's the problem? What can be done about it? And maybe hopefully a few things that will resonate with this group. You hear me okay, Jason?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first of all, the views that I'm talking about are my own. They don't reflect the U.S. government for whom I work. But I wanted to just make that clear. But I have had experience here and had some great co-workers and friends that have contributed to this. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight. The first thing I want to do is state the problem. And I gave a couple of handouts. I don't know if everyone has access to them. I'll hold it up in a second. But, as you noted, people don't sleep enough in the military. So I got to participate in a RAND study back in 2015. And they came up with some numbers, and they're pretty shocking when you look at it. Military sleep deprivation is the title. And when you look at military populations, the vast majority, probably 60%, are less than 6 hours of sleep per night. 5 was the highest number, as a matter of fact. Now that I'm retired, the civilian population, I'm in that group, and it's more like 7 to 8, which is kind of normal. And so that's, I'll hold this up. That's this graph right here. Right? So here is us, the military population. And here's me now with going to bed at 10 o'clock and 2 dogs that wake me up at 6 a.m. So that's 8 hours. So that's the problem. Why is that a problem? Well, the next little slide that I gave you is from the postgraduate school, Dr. Anita Shattuck and her group, with some short-term, mid-term, and long-term effects of sleep deprivation. Short-term, you're looking at things like loss of memory, poor motor skills, poor judgment. Not the kind of stuff you want to have in your officer of the deck who's up in the middle of the night on watch. Midterm effects, things like after you go through a deployment, standing a non-circadian watch rotation, which we'll talk about. Now you're looking at memory loss, decreased training, decreased retention, poor memory, and just overall detriment to your performance, mission degradation. Again, not the kind of stuff you want your commanding officer, your flag officers, and your leaders. And then for this group, probably just as important are the long-term effects, where you get into your health, your well-being, and even studies that link it to things like diabetes, obesity, and even cancer. So those are some of the things. That's the part of the problem. And what I've started to tell folks is, this isn't something that just happens to us. This is something that we actively participate, almost in inflicting this upon our sailors. And so we can make a difference here. And that's kind of what I want to talk about tonight. So I want to start with a sea story per Jason's direction. The year is 2002. USS Oscar Austin is just north of the Copenhagen Bridge on a Form 1 at about going about 180 southerly course. They're about 15 knots with 4 destroyers behind it. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. For you aviators of Form 1, it looks something like this at about that speed. Okay, that's my slow sea story. So the captain's on the bridge. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. He's been up for about 36 hours, and he's kind of tired. And he's going into what's called micro sleeps, right? But what wakes him up is a ruckus on the bridge. And so it went something like this. Captain wakes up, kind of looks around. It's dark, disoriented because he's almost been asleep on his feet. And he goes, hey, off the deck, where are we? Well, sir, we haven't had a fix in 6 minutes. Okay, navigator, where's shoal water? Sir, it's about 2,000 yards away, but I can't tell you what direction. At that point, the captain says, this is the captain. I have the con. All engines stop, rudder amidships. The XO hollers out, hey, captain, we have 4 ships behind us. You realize that, right? Grab the bridge to bridge, all stations, all ships in formation Gulf. This is Oscar Austin. I have lost situation awareness. I've stopped my engines. Please remain clear. This all happened in the space of about 30 seconds. Got a fix. Got our bearings, got back into safe water, and headed back out. So everything's fine, right? Well, the next day, it wasn't fine when my Commodore gave me a pretty large butt chewing for basically putting the ship in danger, putting my crew in danger, and really endangering the whole mission. So I failed that night. I failed myself, and I failed my crew. And so that stuck with me. But it took me until my next command tour to really figure out a way to address it. And so that's what I wanted to talk about, is how we sort of embarked on this journey that I kind of call my circadian journey. So USS San Jacinto, 2010, I met 2 folks who really changed the trajectory of my life by about 15 degrees. So, you know, if you're cruising along in life, you meet people sometimes that come and go, but some of them really sort of knock you to the side. And this was Dr. Nita Shattuck and Miss Leanne Braddock, who's actually on this call out there. I saw her chime in. Leanne ran the operational stress control team for the Navy, and Dr. Shattuck runs the crew endurance team for the postgraduate school. So they put us on a watch experiment, 3 on, 9 off, 3 hours on, 9 hours off. Circadian, because you stand the same watch every day. It's a short watch. And then when you have the 9 hours off, for one period you sleep, and for one you work. We did that for 7.5 months, and the word revolutionary doesn't really cut it. We were a pirate ship, right? For those of you SWOs, imagine this: no taps, no reveille, no 1MC use after dark, lights out in berthing pretty much all day, except for between like 11 and 1. Some of the other stuff we did, we changed the meal hours, we changed the training hours. The chaplain came in and said, hey, what about the evening prayer? And I said, well, you know, pretty much every deity that I know is awake at noontime, so let's do a noon prayer. And so we did that. And so we shifted everything around, and it worked. Sent a message on it, won the SecNav Safety Award, wrote an article on it, Dr. Shattuck, won the Surface Navy Literary Award. And I'm thinking, hey, this is going to change everything. Then I got over to the TICOM staff, Type Commander staff, and then said, hey, let's get about changing this. And then I realized the resistance to change, right? The Navy is a big ship, I got, you know, small rudder, and course changes don't happen easily. And so there was some cultural resistance to this. Jason, you probably remember this time, you know, where lack of sleep was almost a gauge of how hard you were working, right? And being well rested was not something that SWOs did, because it was almost something to be embarrassed about. And so culturally,
it's something to tease the brand shoes about.
Yes, right. And so you know, sleep till you're hungry, eat till you're tired, or something like that, right? So, but it wasn't the culture, and also it's not SWO culture to tell the captain how to run his ship or her ship. And so lots of pushback and sort of institutional resistance, and trying to change people's minds. So that went on. There were some best practices, messages that came out, and the word was spreading amongst other sailors and other ships, and people were using it, but it really wasn't policy. Fast forward to 2017. You know, there's a lot more to these stories, but I'm you know, trying to keep it moving here. But 2017, 2 ship collisions. USS Fitzgerald, USS John S. McCain, 17 dead sailors. And when you look at the comprehensive review and the NTSB report, the word fatigue pops out all over the place. It was sort of a subtext of the entire conversation. So CERFOR signs out a circadian watch rotation notice and basically mandates the ships go into a circadian rotation. I should note for the submariners in the group, the submarine force had done this as early as 2015, had shifted their watch rotations to a 24-hour clock after decades of an 18-hour clock. So that was sort of the way that came about. So they mandated that. Nita Shattuck and her team put out some really good training on it, started a website, the Crew Endurance website, which you can look at on the postgraduate school site. Lots of information there. And the Surface Navy kind of shifted over to a what they call the Crew Endurance and Fatigue Management policy. And so they've been doing that and doing studies on it for a while, and it really has shown some really good results. It's now part of the pipeline training, and pretty much every surface ship is using it. The submarines are using it. Carriers, it's spread there. I think cross-pollination from the surface force and the nukes, and so it definitely has picked up steam. But this is about culture, right? And that's where it's difficult. And some of the challenges that I found, and I'm sure some of you can relate, is sort of the I call it the smart captain syndrome, right? I don't know how many times I would watch myself, Dr. Shattuck, or Leanne, or somebody talk to someone about this. And you can kind of see the wheels turn that, well, first of all, what are you talking about, right? Like, who are you? And then it would be, well, I'm pretty smart and I didn't think of this, and therefore, there can't be much to it. And then so it wouldn't gain traction. People thought maybe they were coddling the sailors. So there was definitely some resistance. And I think what overcame the resistance was just the way it worked and the way that the junior sailors liked it. And I've had some great feedback from some who have known nothing but circadian watch rotations. Leanne's son is out there right now as a department head. And so you can see that next generation hopefully benefiting from this. So what's the way ahead? So the rest of my story was retired from the Navy in 2013, went off and got a master's and then a PhD in human systems integration, and decided to come back and quit sniping from the sidelines after writing a bunch of articles and join the fray again. So I'm a human factors engineer working in the Surface Navy, looking at this among other things and trying to figure out how we can implement this and codify it and make it better for the sailors. So that's kind of it, sort of what's my long-term goal. I hope that we can continue to change the culture. That's where I could use your help. I think a lot of you are out there now, have experienced this and maybe could share, become a sort of an advocate for this. If you have kids that are out there in the fleet, talk to them, let them know where to go to look for this. If you're in active duty now, we shouldn't do this to you, right? I didn't mention it, but the other handout that I gave you was a graph of a captain who, this wasn't me, but it was another one where they put a sleep watch on him for a deployment. And you can see, if you have this handout, I don't know if you can read it there, 5.2 hours a night was his average sleep, which if you go to the sleep studies, that tells you that that's about the same as being legally drunk about 15% of the time. And that's on a 6-month deployment. So think about that. That's the person with weapons release authority. That's the person with the crew's life in their hands. And that's kind of where we're at. There's a graph there that kind of shows how that translates. You can take a look at that, but that's kind of the point. I sent you an article as well that sort of quotes a gentleman named Jonathan Shea, who talks about the moral obligation for self-care as a commander, that you have an obligation to take care of yourself and take care of your crew. Because if you fail like I did on that night in 2002, we were probably 1,000 yards from shoal water going 15 knots. I can't do math, but I think that qualifies as a near miss. So how do you change an organization like this? And so I've sort of tried to put this together. I've collected the articles in the form of a book that is coming out soon called Going Circadian, and on Amazon. And it's basically telling this story. But the one piece about change I wanted to point out was, how do you get here? Well, the first one is passion, right? You have to have something you care about, something you're going to do in your free time. something that, no pun intended, keeps you up at night. You got to have persistence. You got to overcome the institutional resistance to change and the normal skepticism. One of my chaplain friends called Dr. Shattuck Cassandra, which I had to look up because I don't know anything about Greek mythology. But so apparently Cassandra could see the future, but nobody believed her. And so that's sort of the way Dr. Shattuck must have felt over the years. And it's a horrible way to be proven right. But I think, we have kind of seen what happens when people do that. So, and patience is the last piece. I mean, it's literally 10 years since that first message left San Jacinto. And one of my friends said, the time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. So I think somehow that holds about. That's about one generation in SWO terms, right? When your department heads become COs or your divos become department heads. And then the last piece of paper that I sent out was sleep tips for old folks, which was basically, for the folks that look like this. A lot of us have sleep challenges. And what I found is by doing the stuff that Dr. Shattuck says, turn out the lights, go to bed early, don't eat before bedtime. That's way better than any pills you can buy over the counter or anything you can find on the internet. Just change your sleep habits, and you can change your life. So with that, two quick things. I just happened to find this in the grocery store like 2 days ago, and I had to buy it. Pretty good National Geographic book with the science of sleep, which I don't go into here. And then this is the Circadian Journey book that's up on Amazon. So you can just Google my name and the word circadian. A bunch of stuff will pop up, or go to the Naval Postgraduate School website. Lots of good information out there, and happy to converse with anyone who wants to kind of engage. Okay, so I'll shut up and turn the mic over to Jason and whoever wants to. Saw some familiar faces out there. I think everyone had to sign a no sea story disclaimer, right, Jason? About if they know
no, sir. No,
what?
No. And as long as they're once in a while, as long as they're true, that's the only requirement. John, I've got a question for you. Just to cement my own understanding here. So let's say that I start with a typical sort of 3-watch rotation, right?
Right.
So how do I transform that into a circadian watch bill? What's operationally, what's the difference?
Okay, great question. So by definition, circadian, as you probably learned in high school, is your body's 24-hour clock. It's kind of a combination of 3 things. It's already kind of built in. It's triggered by light, to some extent noise, and some chemicals in your body, melatonin or some other ones. And then so they sort of interact to create this cycle of wakefulness and sleepfulness that you can look up. And, this book tells a pretty good story of that. But the 24-hour clock is pretty well built into us humans, and it always has been. So if you align your watch rotation to a 24 hours, and the 3 pieces of this puzzle is, one, you have to stand the same watch every day. So it can be 3 on, 9 off, 3 on, 9 off. That's 24. It could be 4 on, 8 off, which a lot of the commercial mariners do. And then you have another watch in the evening and one in the morning. Or it could even be 6 and 6, although that's not a good one. But it's still circadian. And so I stood most of my watches in what's called 5 and dimes, which is 5 on, 10 off. You never sleep the same time at night. You may be up for 24 hours and then sleep for 10, but then you have a sleep deficit because your body doesn't. It's literally like flying back and forth across the United States every day, right? When you stand the normal Navy watch that we were doing for decades. So that's what you're doing to your body. So that's circadian. And just one last thing is, it's not just the watch bill, right? You have to change the daily routine, and you have to sort of honor or protect a sleep period. So that's why if I had the mid to 3, I slept in until 10 a.m., right? I still got as much work done. All you're doing is rearranging the workday, but that is such to get your head around that. Very tough. And
you're not, if I understand correctly, that a key difference here is that you're not rotating the watch.
Correct. Right. Some ships have done a whole deployment with that exact, like every morning I have the 3 to 7 or the mid to 3 and noon to 3. Some ships rotate about every 2 to 3 weeks is kind of what the science will tell you is about the sweet spot. One of the things you'll find is if I'm on one watch rotation, it's like everything else. Everybody else's looks better than mine, right? I'm the guy who's getting screwed. and then we shift, and then, hey, wait a minute, I'm still the guy getting, so that sort of keeps it even across the board. And there are advantages. There is studies that say even though you're on the same schedule, if you stay on nights, it's still detrimental. So, but the key is to build the watch bill and then build a schedule around the watch bill and not be sort of married to the standard Navy workday.
Gotcha. So then what happens, I guess two related questions. Number one, does it apply to the wardroom as well?
Yes, it applied. Basically, what we did is we took the watch bill, and that was the primary thing. So you're on a warship underway. That's a great observation. So one of my friends is a Greek officer, and he rides Navy ships as part of his postgraduate work. And he goes, "You guys crack me up. When I'm on the bridge of my ship in Greece, we're focused on driving the ship, right? That's what we do. If I go on to an American ship, there's 20 people on the bridge, and they're doing everything but focused on driving the ship. And then when they get off watch, they go do general military training, and they do all this admin, and they're out to sea, but their focus is not, the operational focus. And so this watch bill really zooms the ship in on what are we out here to do? We're out here to stand a good watch. Because when somebody shoots at you, or you're in a narrow channel, you don't have time, and your reaction time matters. So that's kind of the mindset. And it applies to everybody.
Yeah, I always just tell people that the big difference between going to sea in the Navy and going out to the field in the Marine Corps is that in the Marine Corps, you can't fit your desk in your backpack.
Yeah, they still want you to do paperwork in the field, I'm sure, though.
Less than you might imagine. Although I was a Lance Corporal, so it probably, there's probably paperwork I didn't have to do. So then, what do you do about sort of unique daily evolution, like quarters and that kind of thing, right? Where division officers are expected to show up at quarters, but if this really applies to the wardroom, then what is it? You send your chief every day? How's that work?
So let's try this. Name an organization other than the Navy or the military where every day every worker shows up and gets told what to do that day. They don't. People know what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to do it. And if they don't, you hold them accountable. So what we did was we actually held, I think, an officer's call right before lunch, like at 11. Everybody got together. We put out the plan of the day. And then after lunch, I think there was sort of a period of enlisted training and Oklahoma. We didn't really do a lot of standing in line or standing in formation, morning quarters. We just sort of said, hey, look, read the plan of the day, do what you're supposed to do. We sort of broke a lot of China, I think, in the standard Navy tradition by just focusing on operation.
How about that? So I guess it makes sense, right? Like, so if you're putting your watch bill first, then you set the watch, and then you can rotate quarters around the watch instead of rotating the watch around quarters.
Well, it's kind of a concept. I made it pretty far in the Navy before I heard the concept of a battle rhythm, right? Where the 24-hour clock and you just do the same thing. You have the intel brief at this time, and the bombs drop at this time, and the planes fly at this time. And it's on a 24-hour cycle. And for a lot of those things, it doesn't matter where in that cycle it happens, as long as it happens once a day. The other big challenge was for meal times. Suppo held up an instruction, not to offend any Suppos on the call, but he said, hey, there's this instruction that says this is when meal times are. To which I went, okay. Here's what meal times are on San Jacinto, right? And so we opened up the chow line at midnight, and we had breakfast from like 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. We had lunch from like 11. Put the CSs, or there were MSs at the time, in shift work. And so, everybody on the ship was sort of involved. Now, it wasn't perfect. There were those that hated it, right? I had a couple of folks. If you couldn't delegate, if you were unwilling to delegate and not be at the brief and have your surrogate do it, you were very unhappy with this watch bill, because I didn't want ops there. I wanted sicko there,
Roger that. Raise your hand if you want to go to sea with John Cordle.
No, not now. Just heard how I can navigate, right?
All right. Well, listen. Let me step back here and open the floor for questions, because I'm sure we've got a couple. Guys, by all means, shout them out.
I have a question. Hey, John.
Please.
Nice to see you again. So Don and I served together on George H.W. Bush. I'm just wondering, did you try any of these tactics while we were in the shipyard? Because it didn't filter up to my day.
No. So great question. So first of all, I did not meet Dr. Shattuck and Leanne until after the Bush.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
And now I did try. So I did make an attempt. I think I can tell this story now. So we had a plan in Reactor because some of my officers, their spouses were nurses and they worked in the medical field. And they have a thing where they do 4 sections and they do 12 on for 4 days in a row. And then they do 4 days off. Right. And then so it's one, I don't know if I can draw it out, but basically you and I would be, Laura would be a watch section, and we would be 12 on, 12 off, and the other folks are off for 4 days, and then they all come on. That mapped out pretty well, except that everybody was afraid that if we gave the sailors 4 days off, they'd get in trouble.
Never come back.
So that plan died. The other piece was the shift workers on the yard pretty much demanded that we match their rotation, or they would cry, delay and disruption or whatever. But I will tell you, one of my wake-up calls, again, I keep doing the same pun, but one of my young officers fell asleep on the Truman when I was on there. On the way on 664, you've all given that drive, got off the mid-shift, ran off the road to the right into a ditch. So I had to go with him to court, traffic court. So we're all in our blues. I'm a lieutenant commander. He's like an ensign or a JG. And the judge just wailed on him, right? The judge was like, how could you, get behind the wheel after a 12-hour shift at 8 o'clock in the morning? And he looks at me and goes, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm his supervisor." And he goes, "Did you know he had no place to sleep?" And I said, "Yes, sir." "And you knew what rotation he was on?" "Yes, sir." So he starts yelling at me. And I'm like, no, it's him. He's the one that was, But yeah, I wish I had thought of it then. The nukes are trying still. There's a lot of effort in that area, but you add on the requirements for drills, the constraint of flight ops. But I don't know if there's any former reactor officers on here, but it's a tough problem. But the Naval Reactors was one of the first ones to sort of embrace this idea that having fatigued operators, they were the drivers for the submarine force to get away from the 18-hour day and match the.
I saw that, Doug.
Well, that's why I was asking the question, because no reflection on you or your leadership at the time, because it sounds like you had this epiphany after you left Bush. But I remember talking to some of those JOs, and they, after that tour, they just wanted to get out of the Navy. They looked permanently tired. They had bags on their eyes for days.
Well, I think there's a study. Yep. Well, we were in shift work, right, with the yards, and I think there's actually a study that showed, and I have to ask Nita about this, but I think the shift work that we use in the Navy is like the worst, right? Like if you wanted to create one that made people tired, this would be the one. And that's probably worth another study of its own, based on the way we rotate and things like that. 7 days on for 12 hours a day, take a day or two off, and then shift in swings and then shift to mids. It's just not a healthy way to live,
So quick question for you then. So have you looked at doing any studies of the flight deck personnel? Because I mean, shooters and the ABHs and the ABEs, and they live and die by the flight schedule on the carrier, and there is no watch section on it. It's just a flight schedule.
That's right. I have not, but I could, certainly it's worth looking into. I think there's a lot of ripe, just now, made some pretty big strides in the technology to put wearable actigraphs on. They even have a ring now. It was a COVID thing, I think, that they came up with, but that ring can be used to monitor. And so I think it'd be interesting. I think, I've found a couple of these studies where the answer has been, we don't want to study that because we might not want to know the answer, But I think that's ripe for that's a great question. I think that we can definitely take that. This position that I'm in, part of the CR was to create one of us at each of the type commanders. So definitely some opportunity there to look at that. But thanks, good question.
Well, it's interesting that there's
so I know the drill. He used to tell stories.
It's interesting that there's crew rest for the flight crew, but not for the flight deck.
Yeah. No, it's a thing. It's a problem. Yeah.
Hey, John.
Well, the aviators figured it out a long time ago, right? I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nirav.
Yeah. Hey, John, I was just wondering. So, we talk about, on the submarine force, we definitely shifted over. One of the things that I never really could get a good handle on is, actually, I guess two things. One, operational experience, because like you said, we wanted to keep people on their rotation for at least 2, if not 3 weeks. And if you're on deployment, you kind of lost some skill set. because the guys on the mid-watch, when nothing was going on, they kind of became less adept when they had to rotate through. And the other part was sort of the sorry, I just lost my thought. But
Probably sleeping.
How much sleep you get?
Yeah, last night probably wasn't a good example, but no,
Right into that one.
The operational side of things, it just was, how do you get did you have any ways that you cracked that nut?
So we rotated every 2 weeks, and now we were a little bit different. We were a counter piracy, so every day looked like the next one, and so we didn't really. The only thing was unreps, some of the flight ops, but we found over 7 months it evened itself out. Right, you kind of take the long view. The other thing that was pretty cool, I'll give one micro C story here is by standing the morning watch every day, you got to know the routine of all the other stuff that was going on in the area, and so one morning. I get a call from the morning watch who says, "Hey, sir, I've been up here for a week now on this 3 to 6 rotation. And the fishing boats always go this way. And suddenly this one ship is going that way. Can I go check him out?" And so we drive the ship over there, pull alongside, ask the captain if he needs help. He says no. My Somali translator said something that I'm not sure exactly what he said. And then suddenly people start running up out of the ship and throwing weapons over the side and throwing their hands up. And the ship had been pirated the night before. The only way we picked up on it was the guy on the deck had that SA, and we were bored and said, "Let's go check it out." So it's pluses and minuses. I think, if you look at the long term, there's ways you can do evolutions instead of drills. You can do walkthroughs, but it does require some creativity. Absolutely.
No, awesome. And, I remember being on the scope, and being drained on the 6-hour watch. And I agree with you. It was very valuable to go to Circadian because I remember my rotation was 30 hours straight and then go get 6 hours of sleep, right? Because you had just too much stuff to go do in between. But even trying to stay focused with 6 hours on the scope was quite a task. So it was hard to get that extra 2 hours of being. Anything that you saw amongst your bridge team or some of the places that people were really focused?
I'll just say that when we shifted, because we kind of started the deployment, we had to get up to 4 sections to get to 3 and 9. So the ships are built 3 sections, which is a whole nother discussion. But because our manpower calculations, completely ignore science, right? They were built back in the 40s, and so. But that's changing. There's a lot of folks that are doing studies to kind of refold this stuff back into the Manning equations, and there've been some changes. So I don't want to shortchange that. But no, what I saw was when we went to the 3-hour watch, people were awake, they were more alert, they worked out more, they qualified faster. It just goes on. In fact, it was weird. Dr. Shattuck did a study where you can measure people's mood. And sort of the longer that they were on this watch, the better their mood got. So in these days of destructive behavior and worried about the way people are reacting to stress, this is a stress relief. It's also a big thing for COVID, for immunity. Sleep has a direct correlation to how your immune system reacts. To your point, in this book, there's a study that a week of 6 hours of sleep, being restricted to 6 hours, equals the same performance as someone who's been up for 24. So it can be short-term, it can be long-term.
Trying to imagine my XO being concerned about my mood. I was always concerned about his.
Just go somewhere else.
It's all fine and dandy until the JO drives the ship aground and the skipper and XO get fired.
Yeah, amen, brother. Well, if you ever wondered why your XO always acted like an angry drunk, now you know.
Yep.